quietly to the east with minimal communications. Throughout the 18-hour flight into the target area, the aircraft completed multiple in-flight refuelings. Once over land, the B-2s linked up with escort and support aircraft in a complex, tightly timed maneuver requiring exact synchronization across multiple platforms in a narrow piece of airspace, all done with minimal communication. At approximately 6:40 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 2:10 a.m. Iran time, the lead B-2 dropped two GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator weapons on the first of several aim points at Fordo. As the president stated last night, the remaining bombers then hit their targets as well, with a total of 14 MOPs dropped against two nuclear target areas. All three Iranian nuclear infrastructure targets were struck between 6:40 p.m. and 7:05 p.m. Eastern time. Again, that's about 2:10 in the morning, local time in Iran. With the Tomahawk missiles being the last to strike at Esfahan to ensure we retain the element of surprise.
An astonishing operation by the United States military. Also on Sunday morning, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth sounded off as well.
Tehran is certainly calculating the reality that planes flew from the middle of America and Missouri overnight, completely undetected over three of their most highly sensitive sites, and we were able to destroy nuclear capabilities. And our boys in those bombers are on their way home right now. We believe that'll have a clear psychological impact on how they view the future, and we certainly hope they take the path of negotiated peace. But I could not be more proud.
Maybe we should shoot faster.
Now, let me be 100% clear. President Trump has more spine, more intestinal fortitude, more cojones than any president of my lifetime. By far, it's not close. This, of course, is a historically courageous man, if that was not clear from the moment he stood up during the last campaign, shaking his fist and yelling, "Fight, fight, fight," after being shot in the ear. President Trump is a man who has courage. He said for decades Iran would not have a nuclear weapon, and then he kept his word. And keeping your word is unbelievably rare. Bill Clinton, 1995, quote, "We are determined to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons." George W. Bush, 2006, "Iran must not be allowed to develop nuclear weapons, period." Barack Obama, 2015, "I have stated that Iran will never be allowed to obtain a nuclear weapon." Joe Biden, 2022, "We will not allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon." Donald J. Trump, "Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated." 2025, this is a man of courage who keeps his word with spine, with true, unbelievable, heroic spine. President Trump is already a historic figure, but he is now a seminal figure in both American history and in world history. First, American history. President Trump faced down a lot of haters, both Democratic America haters and their Republican horseshoe theory isolationist friends. President Trump was never going to start World War III. That was not what was going to happen here. Anyone who told you that was going to happen was lying to you, because President Trump lives in the world. He lives in the world of reality. And he played this absolutely perfectly. It is not possible for a president to have played this better. President Trump was not dragged into a war. He managed this with absolutely stunning professionalism, cleverness, with common sense. He gave the Israelis the ability to do what they needed to do, and then Israel did with unbelievable courage and innovation. Israel cleared the skies. Israel killed Iran's top generals. Israel devastated their nuclear scientists. And President Trump waited. He offered Iran an offer, and then another offer, and then another offer. Off-ramps and off-ramps. And then, when they didn't take it, he acted brilliantly with our unparalleled American military, the greatest military in the history of planet Earth, bar none, no second competitor. In the face of those who believe, both left and right, that American involvement in the world is somehow the prime evil, the great driver of world suffering, that the world is somehow better off in the hands of the Chinese and the Russians and Iran going nuclear, he stood up. He stood up to the morons like AOC on the left who proclaim that Trump himself is a Hitlerian threat to the world by standing up to a true Hitlerian threat to the world. And he stood up to the dolts on the right who thought that they could somehow claim the movement Donald Trump built, the Make America Great Again movement, for themselves, painting Howard Zinn America-hating turd with a coating of MAGA language and then trying to pass it off as filet mignon. He stood up to all of them, and he proved that America is great again, which brings us to world history. America must be strong in the world. We are the indispensable power. We always were. We must be. And President Trump always understood that to make America great again, America would actually have to be great, which meant reestablishing a central principle. Do not with the United States of America on our core interests. Do not do it. Joe Biden destroyed that credibility. He did so in Afghanistan. He said don't, and then every single person who could did. Not anymore. President Trump has reestablished American deterrence. He has reestablished American strength. He always said peace through strength, and he always meant it. This is because President Trump understands the most important things. American power matters. American credibility matters. American honor matters. And then there's the future of the world, because everything just changed. The Middle East is now a very different place. Israel, our closest ally in the Middle East, maybe in the world, is a regional power with the support of the United States. The Abraham Accords are in the offing for Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Sunni world. The United States is working closely with the Saudis, with the UAE, with Bahrain, with powers in the northern African sphere to join the Abraham Accords, with Iran on its heels, rocked, their nuclear program destroyed. That is a possibility that would not have been thinkable just a couple of years ago. China, even more importantly, is now thinking twice about Taiwan. Remember, China has been looking across that Taiwan Strait, thinking maybe we'll take Taiwan, and maybe President Trump will do nothing. Well, maybe they're having a second think now that President Trump has used some mobs to drop them to massive ordnance penetrators, to drop them on Iranian nuclear facilities. Russia, which may have been casting its eyes at Northern Europe, at Eastern Europe, has to be thinking a little bit about what future expansionism would mean. Because of President Trump. He is truly an all-time historic figure. He proved it again over the course of the last few weeks. There has never been anyone quite like him. Probably won't be again. He thinks differently, he acts differently, and that is a magnificent, magnificent thing. Folks, we'll get to more on this in just a moment. First, of course, in these uncertain days, Israel faces attacks as war with Iran continues. Families across Israel are living in fear. They're wondering if the next siren will sound in their neighborhood. Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, targeting nuclear and military sites deep inside Iran to prevent an existential threat, while bracing for retaliation that is endangering hundreds, thousands, perhaps millions of innocent lives. In the midst of crisis, hope endures. The International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, IFCJ, is on the ground delivering life-saving aid where it's needed most. IFCJ provides emergency food, shelter, trauma support, and security upgrades, including bomb shelters and fortified hospital units. In the past year alone, IFCJ has helped over 2 million people, supplying basic needs to the elderly, Holocaust survivors, new immigrants, and children traumatized by war. As Israel defends her citizens, IFCJ stands with them, funding bulletproof ambulances, supporting first responders, offering comfort to those in the line of fire. Your support needs food for the hungry, safety for the vulnerable, hope for a nation under siege. Now, as the world watches and uncertainty grows, you can make a difference through donations together. You can bring light to the darkest moments. Visit benforthefellowship.org to donate today. That's one word, benforthefellowship.org to donate. Alrighty, so let's talk about how this happened. Obviously, there were divisions inside the administration. There were rumors up to the day before the actual strike that there were members of the administration, particularly the vice president, who was not supporting the strike. There was some suggestion that the vice president was pushing, saying the United States shouldn't be involved, suggesting the Israelis were going to drag the country into war. Now, that's been denied by the vice president, by others, and we know that there was a big fight inside the administration over the course of the last few weeks over the proper path forward. President Trump did not waver on this thing. Apparently, according to Axios, behind the scenes, President Trump's request was made directly to Benjamin Netanyahu last week, that Netanyahu essentially cleared the airspace of Iran, take out particular air defense units in order to clear a path for the B-2. Netanyahu apparently said, how can we help? Trump told Netanyahu he wanted the IAF, of course, to eliminate as many Iranian air defense systems as possible in southern Iran to clear a path for incoming U.S. B-2 stealth bombers. The U.S. then provided Israel with a list of air defense systems it wanted eliminated ahead of the strike, according to an Israeli official. Apparently, according to Axios, an Israeli official told Axios, we did not press the United States to join the war. We are careful not to create the impression that we are dragging the U.S. into a war. But luckily for us, God hardened Pharaoh's heart. That would be Iran's supreme leader, Khamenei. He acted like an idiot and refused any proposal from the United States. That is absolutely true, obviously. Apparently, the president gave his final go-ahead for the strike a few hours before the actual strike, but there were indications he'd been moving solidly in this direction over the course of the week. A senior administration official said the goal was to create a situation when everyone wasn't expecting it. which is why presumably on Friday, as I talked about on the show, he said he would make a decision within 2 weeks. As I said, the most likely scenario was this. This was the most likely scenario. Not to say I called it, but of course I did, because President Trump has been very consistent in his approach right here. His order to the military to proceed unleashed an operation that has been the focus of top-secret planning, according to the Wall Street Journal. Within hours, B-2 bombers penetrated Iranian airspace and dropped at least half a dozen bunker bombs on Iran's underground nuclear facility at Fordo, and, as we say, U.S. attack submarines launched Tomahawk cruise missiles against sites in Isfahan as well as Natanz. Apparently, the special envoy, Steve Witkoff, has now been authorized to talk with the Iranians, mainly so that he can hear their proposals for getting everyone to stop slamming the living hell out of them. And the president has made very clear, if Iran reacts the wrong way, there is more coming. If Iran decides that they want to react by attacking the United States, if they wish to respond by closing the Straits of Hormuz, there are a wide variety of things that are bad that Iran can do. And if they do certain things that are bad, much worse things are going to happen. Again, for all of those who are claiming that this was all about regime change, that the United States was going to launch hundreds of thousands of troops into Iran the same way that we did in Iraq, that was always sheer absolute crap. But strategically speaking, the reason that Ayatollah Khamenei is alive, beyond the fact that the United States doesn't feel like rebuilding the place, and wouldn't even if Ayatollah Khamenei were killed, because it would be up to the Iranian people to actually do it. The reason for that is because there are a lot of things the United States can do to escalate this, should Iran decide to escalate this. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke quickly after the president issued the airstrike. Here's what he had to say.
Congratulations, President Trump. Your bold decision to target Iran's nuclear facilities with the awesome and righteous might of the United States will change history. In Operation Rising Lion, Israel has done truly amazing things. But in tonight's action against Iran's nuclear facilities, America has been truly unsurpassed. It has done what no other country on earth could do. History will record that President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons. His leadership today has created a pivot of history that can help lead the Middle East and beyond to a future of prosperity and peace. President Trump and I often say, peace through strength. First comes strength, then comes peace. And tonight, President Trump of the United States acted with authority. President Trump, I thank you. The people of Israel thank you. The forces of civilization thank you. God bless America. God bless Israel. And may God bless our unshakable alliance, our unbreakable faith.
Meanwhile, the Iranians are doing what they always do. They're threatening fire and fury. Now, to be clear, the reason that I'm making fun of that a little bit is because literally every night of this war so far, they've issued some public statement about how this will be a historic night that will be remembered for the rest of time. And then they shoot off like 10 missiles at it. So this idea that they are going to take on the #1 military power on planet Earth after having their air defenses completely destroyed, their top general staff killed, all of their nuclear scientists dead, and their main nuclear facilities reduced to ash, I don't know, man. I don't think that that's what's in the cards here. Now, that doesn't mean that Iran can't do anything. Iran could theoretically launch some terror attacks. They could try to kill Westerners in small numbers elsewhere as a sort of symbolic gesture of how much they hate the West. But the idea that they are a widespread threat at this point in time after the defenestration of so much of their military capacity, again, that is highly unlikely, shall we say. So Iran has been issuing all sorts of empty threats.
That's 3.
The Iranians have said that the United States will somehow pay. They aired a map of U.S. military bases in the Middle East, and they declared, Mr. Trump, you started, we will end it. That was on Iranian state TV. If by end it you mean your own regime, then good luck to you, and I hope that you enjoy what comes next. President Trump made that very clear as well on Truth Social. Quote, any retaliation by Iran against the United States of America will be met with force far greater than what was witnessed tonight. Thank you, Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. Again, I enjoy his sign-offs so much. They really are enjoyable. Like people don't know who he is at this point. He has to sign off with President of the United States. Meanwhile, Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, he made clear as well. He says, listen, if you retaliate, you just won't be in power anymore.
If they want to target Americans in the region or around the world, there are many more targets inside of Iran. So I cannot stress enough what President Trump has said, that they should not retaliate against our troops or American citizens anywhere if they want to continue in power.
We'll get to more on this in a moment. First, when you're getting ready for bed, going around locking doors, turning off lights, you just want that peace of mind and knowing everything is secure. That's exactly what you get with Simply Safe. It really makes all the difference when it comes to home security. Most security systems only kick in after somebody's already broken into your home. By then, it's too late. Simply Safe's new Active Guard outdoor protection actually helps to stop breaches before they can happen. Here's how it works. AI-powered cameras work with live monitoring agents to spot suspicious activity around your property. If someone's lurking around, the agents can talk to them in real time, provide spotlights, call the police if necessary. It stops crime before it starts. What I really love, there are no contracts, no hidden fees, plus Simply Safe has serious credibility. CNET just named them Best Home Security System of 2025 with 4 million Americans trusted. They're also ranked #1 in customer service by Newsweek and USA Today. We have a Simply Safe system at our studios in South Florida. It's great. It means when we lock up every night, we know everything's going to be there when we come back in the morning. Monitoring plans start around $1 a day. We offer a 60-day money-back guarantee, so you can try it for free. Visit simplysafe.com/Shapiro. Claim 50% off a new system with a professional monitoring plan. Get your first month for free. That's simplysafe.com/Shapiro. There's no safe like Simply Safe. Okay, so what is Iran going to do? Well, they have now announced that they are going to order the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Okay, so according to the New York Post, Iran's parliament has voted to close the Strait of Hormuz, the vital shipping channel through which around 20% of the world's daily oil flows. The move, which could block $1 billion in oil shipments per day, is likely to send oil prices soaring. Now, number one, as far as the United States is concerned, that actually, in the short term, not wonderful because you have higher prices at the pump, but in the mid to long term, it's actually not quite terrible because one of the problems, the very low oil prices we've been seeing recently, is that new drilling has actually stopped dead in the United States. New fracking of wells, new drilling in the United States has actually stopped. So a slightly higher oil price is good. It's conducive to the American oil industry right now. But there is a bigger problem with what Iran is doing. And for that, we turn to our sponsors over at Perplexity. So, quick question for Perplexity. How much of China's oil is supplied via the Strait of Hormuz? How much of the United States' oil is supplied via the Strait of Hormuz? Because here's the thing. The United States, we're pretty self-sufficient in terms of oil. And Iran shutting off the Strait of Hormuz, it's going to hurt China way worse than it hurts us. According to Perplexity, approximately 20 million barrels of oil per day, about 20% of global consumption, pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Of the oil that transits Hormuz, 70 to 82% of all of it is destined for Asian markets. China is the single largest recipient. China, along with India, Japan, and South Korea, accounted for 67% of all crude oil and condensate flows through the Strait in 2022 and the first half of 2023. So China bleeds first. Analysts say if this is what happens, then actually the people hit hardest are, wait for it, the Chinese. That seems like a really stupid strategic move. How about the United States? Well, the United States imports about 0.7 million barrels of oil per day of crude oil and condensate from Persian Gulf countries through the Strait of Hormuz as of 2022. That accounts for 3% of total U.S. petroleum liquids consumption. Not 70 to 82%, 3%. So, again, could that be a long-term problem in the same way that it's kind of a problem that the Houthis have shut down the Red Sea? Sure, that could be a problem. Also, it could give Israel an excuse to sink the Iranian Navy. And the fact is the United States did that under Ronald Reagan in 1988. The Iranians were making trouble, so Reagan just sank all of it. It's not like the Iranian Navy is the British Navy circa 1870 or something. So, again, if this is the best they can do, first of all, it hits exactly the wrong people. There are also no allies coming to the rescue of Iran at this point. Perhaps the most astonishing headline of the weekend, other than the actual attack itself authorized by President Trump, was Hezbollah. So Hezbollah, of course, is supposedly massively powerful terrorist group that existed in Syria and Lebanon, armed with supposedly hundreds of thousands of highly targeted rockets aimed at Israeli skyscrapers. And then Israel completely wiped them out in October of 2024. There's the Beeper operation of 2024. There was the killing of Hassan Nasrallah. There was the destruction of all of their stockpiles of weaponry. There was the driving of them completely out of southern Lebanon. Hezbollah getting hit so hard that they couldn't even stand up for the Assad regime when HTS, backed by Turkey, took over Syria. So, Hezbollah has been asked by Iran, can you guys help, like, a little? And Hezbollah's like, have fun, guys. I hope you do great, yeah. According to the Times of Israel, Hezbollah will not attack either Israel or the United States after a spokesperson for the Iran-backed pair group told Newsweek Quote, Iran is a strong country capable of defending itself. Logic dictates it can confront America and Israel. Have fun. You guys are doing great. I hope that you know what? You can handle this all by yourselves. That is because Hezbollah understand that if it were to get involved at this point, Israel would just go and fight. Israel and the Hezbollah and the Lebanese government essentially said, meanwhile, how about the Russians? Well, the Russians are talking a lot. So the Russians are suggesting
If it's worth shooting once,
that
it's probably worth
somebody
shooting
might move a nuclear warhead into Iran, like from abroad. Apparently, the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi announced on Sunday he will travel to Moscow for high-level talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin, which may very well mean that he's going to travel to Moscow and just kind of take the stage, like Bashar al-Assad did, as you recall. Araghchi said, Russia is a friend of Iran. We always consult with each other. I'm going to Moscow this afternoon for serious consultations with the Russian president tomorrow morning. And Dmitry Medvedev, ex-Russian president and deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council, said Trump, who came in as a peacemaker president, has started a new war for the U.S. I want to hear about peacemakers in the country that invaded Ukraine, killing tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of its own citizens. He then suggested the enrichment of nuclear material, and now we can say it outright, the future production of nuclear weapons will continue. And, quote, a number of countries are ready to directly supply Iran with their own nuclear warheads. No. Stop it. Russia, if Russia wanted to supply Iran with a nuclear warhead, they would have done so long ago. They don't want Iran to have a nuclear warhead. In fact, Vladimir Putin was asked directly about the situation. He said, well, actually, it turns out like a lot of Israeli citizens are Russian in origin and speak Russian. And so we actually don't want to endanger those people. So again, lots of empty threats coming from a lot of quite terrible people. What does all of it amount to? We'll have to wait and see. However, let us just say that Iran is in the weakest position it has been since the Iranian Revolution in 1979. And were they to lash out in too dramatic a fashion at Israel, the United States, any of the U.S.'s allies, things would get a whole hell of a lot worse. The president made that quite clear. Joining us on the line is Amit Segal. He's the chief political analyst for Israel's leading news outlet, Channel 12 News, and author of the daily newsletter, It's Noon in Israel. Amit, thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ben. Good night from Israel.
So let's talk about what this means to Israel that President Trump authorized the strike on Iran's Fordo facility, the nuclear facility buried under 90 meters of rock, using some of the most sophisticated planes and weaponry known to man, stuff that is only available to the United States. First of all, what does it mean to Israel? What does it mean to the world? What does it mean for the United States that President Trump took what I think is one of the bravest actions I've ever seen a president take?
I think it's the first time the United States of America has adopted the Begin doctrine. Begin was is the late Prime Minister of Israel, who in 1981 set the rule that there won't be a nuclear weapon in the Middle East. And when Iraq tried to obtain a nuclear weapon, so he bombed it. Ronald Reagan, the then president, condemned Begin and even declared a temporary arms embargo. So it's very, very good to see that President Trump did not follow Reagan's steps in that matter, and actually joined the Begin doctrine, thus bombing Iran's nuclear facilities.
So let's talk about the extent to which this prevents Iran's nuclear ambitions moving forward. What comes next? Obviously, every time Iran is hit, they then sound off and talk about fire and fury and how they're going to destroy everything in sight. I think every single night of the war so far, they've issued some sort of statement about how it will be a historic night forever. And they actually made it no fires and missiles in Israel, 8 of which will be shot down, and 2 of which will fall in civilian areas. So what does it mean when Iran is threatening, shaking its fist at the United States, threatening the Straits of Hormuz, threatening Israel?
So they are trying to do Israel, to cause Israel the most severe damage. That's what they can do. It's not that they can escalate against Israel. The only question is the United States. Will they shut down the Hormuz area? I'm not sure. Will they try to kill Americans? I think that President Trump and Secretary Rubio put it in the most blunt words that it would be considered a declaration of war. So I think, in my opinion, that they will try to do something symbolic, unless Ayatollah Khamenei decided to go nuts and to actually end this regime. Now, here's the thing. We have a case in our history in which a dictator in the Middle East didn't understand a Republican U.S. president threatening him. It was Saddam Hussein. But Saddam Hussein could explain himself because he really didn't have weapons of mass destruction. Now, Ayatollah Khamenei knows that there was a reason why President Trump came after him. So it would be extremely stupid for him to try and engage a war against the United States of America, because he has only one level to escalate against the U.S. Troops. But the U.S. has a lot to escalate. For instance, the 85% of the Iranian economy are concentrated in one island and one port. For instance, killing Khamenei himself in a bunker in northern Tehran, etc., etc. So it would be a very, very stupid thing for Ayatollah Khamenei to do, which is exactly the reason why there is a suspicion he might try to do.
So, I mean, when we look at what Israel does next year, how much longer this war lasts. So President Trump made very clear this was his mission. His mission is now accomplished, barring some sort of further action from the Iranians. Israel, of course, continues to fly sorties because they're ballistic missiles that are still flying into Israel every single night. So from Israel's perspective, how much longer does this mission last? What does this look like? Does this look more like Prime Minister Netanyahu declares an end to major military operations, and then essentially it's mowing the lawn in Iran the same way that it has been in Judea and Samaria or in the Gaza Strip or southern Lebanon or southern Syria in the moment?
Okay, so as for Israel, in a week or so, Israel is about to end its pilot targets in Iran, which includes the Iranian nuclear facilities, almost 100% done. The ballistic missile program, 75% done. Israel eliminated 2/3 of the launchers and give or take 1/4 of the ballistic missiles. So once Israel eliminates 30, 40, 50 more launchers, it necessarily means that we can actually back to give or take normal routine in Israel. So Prime Minister Netanyahu tonight said, give or take, that silence will be met with silence. This is a notorious, an infamous, policy that Israel has taken over the last decades against Hamas and Hezbollah, which said you can actually build your arsenal and you recruit new terrorists and build tunnels, but as long as you don't attack us, we won't attack you. Now, it's the same policy, but different. Because it's the same policy applied after Israel is to and will have already eliminated their launchers and ballistic missiles and their nuclear program. So it emanates from the fact that Israel is under the impression that Iran would not be able to sign a deal. They have been humiliated too much, they are too proud, they will not be able to sign a deal. Only sort of an undeclared ceasefire.
So, I mean, when we look at how this shapes the future for Israel, obviously the answer is in enormous ways. Israel has completely reshuffled the deck in the Middle East. If you had said to most people after October 7th and the devastation of October 7th, that fast forward a year and a half, and Israel would have essentially wiped out Hezbollah, so Hezbollah can't even get involved in this conflict, that they hit Hezbollah so hard that Assad fell in Syria, clearing the skies for Israeli highway, like an air highway, from Tel Aviv essentially to Tehran, that Israel would have devastated Hamas, that Israel would be flying clear sorties over Iranian skies in the middle of the day for weeks on end. People would have thought you're nuts. I mean, what this appears to have done is set Israel up as an extraordinary regional power for the foreseeable future. What does that mean for the Abraham Accords? And also, what does that mean for the Gaza Strip, where Israel is still attempting to finish off Hamas, restore its hostages? Israel obviously has been using Gaza Humanitarian Foundation to disintermediate the United Nations and anyone else who's working for Hamas. What does this mean for the immediate and midterm future for the state of Israel?
So first of all, it's an opportunity to reframe this war. The horrific events of October 7, 2023 were not the beginning of the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza, but the Pearl Harbor in the regional war of Israel against Iran. And this gives an explanation. Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, is not a state leader, but a division commander that actually rebuilt his leadership in Tehran, thus invading Israel without notifying Tehran and Beirut. And that's why Israel overcome Pearl Harbor exactly the way Roosevelt overcame Pearl Harbor. And that's the reason, in my opinion, why defeating Iran following the defeat of Hezbollah and Syria would lead to a sort of new solutions in Gaza. I'll give you one example, for instance. And I know that Hamas leaders are horrified by the event. It's as if an Israeli prime minister would wake up in the morning only to find out that China occupied Washington. Now here's the thing. It can open a window for a total collapse of Hamas, or for a total surrender of parts of Hamas, or for something of an interim agreement in which Israel can actually save the perimeter and Philadelphia corridor, and to have the free access to Gaza if terrorist activities coming back, and that will actually wrap up the war with a peace agreement with Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia would get the end of the Gaza war, and in exchange, it will give peace agreement with Israel. That's, in my opinion, one of the scenarios that are feasible.
So, I mean, obviously, this is not just a triumph for Prime Minister Netanyahu and for Israel. It's also a triumph for President Trump, who managed this as well as any world leader has managed a conflict. He gave Prime Minister Netanyahu the green light, either before or after the actual strikes went forward. He obviously had provided material support. He never wavered in his support for Israel along this entire line. He said that Israel needed to do what it had to do. And then he said, okay, when it appears clear that the Israelis need some help finishing off Fordo, at least to not take whatever the risky option be, he then went and he did the thing. It's an extraordinary act of spying by the President of the United States. He changed the world. He changed the Middle East in one stroke. And honestly, I can't give too much credit for the President of the United States for making this move for both America and civilization more broadly. What's the feeling in Israel about President Trump?
Well, I used to say that Israel could have been the greatest state in the United States if it joined the United States as the 51st state. It's something between Montana and Alabama. Now I think it's even redder than what is the reddest state? The most popular one? I think okay, so it's so I think Kamala Harris shouldn't have registered to run here tomorrow morning. It's something like 95% to 5, and I think Israel is so lucky that President Trump won the election, because there is no chance on earth that President Harris would have done it. You know, if you read the statements by senators like Chuck Schumer, who pretended to be a true friend of Israel, that pay a lip service to say that Iran is a terrorist state, and yet opposes this attack without the approval of Congress, as if Iranians wouldn't have listened to Congress. It would have been kept a secret. So President Trump is very popular in Israel right now, and he didn't have the October 7th failure to actually compensate for, like Netanyahu. But this combination of President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu turns to be, I think, one of the most powerful alliances between a president and a prime minister, and in this case, for the benefit of the whole region.
Well, Amit Segal, again, thank you for your coverage. He's chief political analyst for Israel's leading news outlet, Channel 12 News, author of the daily newsletter, It's Noon Israel, which you should absolutely check out as well. His Telegram channel, his stuff is really great. Amit, thanks so much for the time and the coverage.
Thanks so much, Ben.
Well, folks, an absolutely historic weekend. The President of the United States, again, unparalleled spine. I've never seen anything remotely like it in my political lifetime. Good for him, good for America, good for Israel, obviously, good for the region, and good for the world. The President just changed the course of world history in a dramatically positive way. And really, thank you, Mr. President. There's a reason that we all supported you. There's a reason we backed you. There's a reason I campaigned for you. Mr. President, thank you for doing the right thing again. Alrighty, folks, we've reached the end of the show. We'll be back here tomorrow with much more. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show. Alrighty, tons to get to today on the show. President Trump saying that he will make his decision about whether to bomb the Fordo nuclear facility within 2 weeks. We'll explain all the permutations of that, what it means. Plus, is ICE raiding Dodger Stadium? And a fight has now broken out between Elon Musk and someone in the Trump administration. But first, it's Friday, and someone brought a leather couch to a gunfight. It's Ben After Dark, 7:30 p.m. Eastern tonight, only on DW+. Tonight I play a game that would confuse Confucius, answer your deranged emails, and Dr. Phil confuses Cam Newton for a pride float. Plus, Glenn Beck ruins my week with a movie pick, and someone gets absolutely annihilated in this week's Ben Destroys. It's unpredictable, unfiltered, and deeply unserious. Join me and my slightly unhinged sidekick, Producer Savvy, as we light the match and walk away in slow motion. It's Ben After Dark tonight, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, exclusively for members only on Daily Wire Plus. Alrighty, folks, so President Trump continues to play his cards, and everybody seems very roiled by this. Everybody on the sort of anti-Israel right and left, that horseshoe theory group, they seem to be very encouraged by the idea that President Trump is going to taco out with regard to Iran, that somehow he's now going to let Iran have a clear pathway to a nuclear weapon or something like that. And some people on the pro-Israel side are very agitated about this as well, thinking the same sort of thing. That's not what's happening. That's not what's I'll explain in a moment. First, the updates from the actual war. So, last night, according to the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, Israel hit Iran's Khondab heavy water research reactors, according to the Times of Israel, a project under construction that had not yet begun operating, and they damaged the nearby plant that makes heavy water, which of course is a crucial component to making a nuclear weapon. Israel has struck several nuclear facilities in Iran. The heavy water reactor, as originally designed, would have been able to easily produce plutonium that could have eventually been used in a nuclear weapon, although of course Iran continues to lie and say that they are not producing nuclear weaponry. Again, if they're not producing nuclear weaponry, I just have a question. Why are they building facilities 300 feet under the ground? You do that if you're building like a normal nuclear energy facility. We have lots of nuclear energy facilities in the United States, in Europe. None of them are built 300 feet below the ground. The only reason to do that is, of course, because you're trying to shield from some sort of attack, because that's not what you're not producing nuclear energy in one of the most oil and natural gas rich regions on planet Earth, because you desperately need more nuclear energy. You're just so green. And I've yet to see the actual explanation for why Iran even needs some level of civilian nuclear enrichment. What is the desperate need for civilian nuclear enrichment? They're just such big environmentalists. They're like Greta Thunberg environmentalists, very worried about oil and natural gas, are they? Over in the Islamic Republic of Iran? In any case, while Israel has been targeting military sites, nuclear scientists in extraordinarily targeted fashion, as always, because that's what the Israeli military does in the way Western militaries typically do. Meanwhile, Ayatollah Khamenei and his friends have been shooting missiles directly into the heart of civilian areas. So the big hit over the course of the last couple days is the Iranians achieved a strike on a hospital. Not like a hospital that hides in an underground Hamas tunnel, which is what's been happening in the Gaza Strip, where Hamas, a terrorist group, uses hospitals in order to shield all of its military facilities, thus daring the Israelis to hit the hospital in order to kill the Hamas terrorists. We are talking just a hospital. This hospital, by the way, does not even have any connection with the Israeli military, like at all. So this is Soroka Medical Center in Beersheba, which is in the south of the country. And here is a video of an Iranian munition, a large Iranian missile, which, by the way, happens to be a cluster bomb, apparently violating international law, hitting a surgery center that miraculously had been evacuated one day before, and basically devastating the building. You can see the missile basically took out the building. And then here is some footage from inside the adjacent building where it was struck. So they were wounding people who were already in the hospital. By the way, worth noting, one of the people who the Iranians have killed in this latest missile barrage, I believe this is a young girl in Ramat Gan, was a 7-year-old who'd been brought to Israel for leukemia treatment. She's now dead because of the Iranians, because this is what the Iranian government is. It is one of the worst governments on planet Earth. According to the Times of Israel, Iran fired a barrage of some 30 ballistic missiles early on Thursday, scoring a direct hit on Israel's main southern hospital, the Soroka Medical Center, and 2 other impacts in the central cities of Holon and Ramat Gan that wounded dozens of people, including 6 in serious condition. Now, again, the number of people who've been wounded and killed in Israel is shockingly low given the size of the barrage the Iranians have been firing. Israel's missile defenses have been working extraordinarily well. With that said, obviously, the attempt to target civilian centers is a difference in kind from what Israel is doing in the other direction. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz suggested that Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei can no longer be permitted to exist. He said Khamenei openly declares he wants Israel destroyed. He personally gives the order to fire on hospitals. He considers the destruction of the state of Israel to be a goal. Such a man can no longer be allowed to exist. Now, whether Israel actually decides to take out Khamenei or whether they do not decide to take out Khamenei, and President Trump has already publicly suggested that Israel and America actually know where Khamenei is hiding. That is a question of politics. That is a question of what would be best for the war effort. Suffice it to say that, again, the Khamenei regime, the Ayatollah's regime in Iran, is deeply evil. A deeply evil regime that represses its people, that shoots protesters in the streets, that targets its various geopolitical opponents, ranging from Israel, which it wishes to extirpate, to Saudi Arabia. Remember, it wasn't all that long ago that they were attempting to burn Saudi oil fields. It's a terrible regime. Now, does that mean that the goal here should be regime change by either Israel or the United States? Israel has said, Benjamin Netanyahu has said, that regime change is not, in fact, the goal. He says, and so does President Trump, that if regime change occurs as an effect of taking down the nuclear regime in Iran, destroying their capacity to create nuclear weapons, well, that's a side product. But nobody, no one, and this is important because you're hearing many, many people, again, on that horseshoe theory right and that horseshoe theory left, lie about the actual agenda here. Just lie straight up. No one is calling for hundreds of thousands of boots on the ground in order to regime change in Iran. And when people even compare this to Libya, that's ridiculous. It is not like Libya. First of all, in Libya, most of the work was done by people who are already on the ground. There was some tangential association with Western intelligence, and I opposed it. It was wrong. We shouldn't have done it. In this particular case, the goal is extirpating the Iranian nuclear program. If the regime falls, that's up to the Iranian people. That's their job. It's their country. But no one that I know of is calling for a full-scale, boots-on-the-ground, Iraq-style nation-building operation. The phrase nation-building has not even entered the conversation on any side here with regard to Iran. So all the people who are suggesting that all of this must end because otherwise Iran is going to cascade into chaos and violence and the regime's going to fall and then we're going to get involved and we're going to be the ones responsible. Again, I do not buy the initial premise that if you break it, you bought it. I just don't buy that premise because I think that is a great way of dissuading you from taking actions against regimes that actually threaten you. Okay, so the big news yesterday is that at the White House press conference with Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, she read a statement from President Trump that essentially set yet another deadline with regard to the destruction of the Iranian nuclear program. I think people are deliberately misreading this in many cases. Here is Caroline Leavitt's statement.
I have a message directly from the president, and I quote, "Based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future, I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks."
Okay, within the next 2 weeks. So first of all, not in 2 weeks, within the next 2 weeks. Okay, so sometime in here, President Trump is going to make a decision. Now, my guess is that the president already knows what he is going to do, because the reality is that the Iranians have no interest in giving up their nuclear program. And this is sort of the point. When you listen to the rest of what Caroline Leavitt had to say yesterday, President Trump is not, as Matt Drudge would say, I don't know when Matt Drudge became a full-scale leftist, but he really is. I mean, there's no distinction between Matt Drudge's front page now and the Huffington Post. They're basically the same. But Matt Drudge has a headline today over at the Drudge Report suggesting Trump tacos for 2 weeks. Tacos, Trump always chickens out. That's what that stands for. Trump is not tacoing. He's not chickening out. That is ridiculous and silly. In fact, Donald Trump put out a post on Truth Social quoting Mark Thiessen of the Washington Post. Quote, "Donald Trump is not an isolationist, but I think some of the Republican isolationists are suddenly discovering they're out of touch with the MAGA movement and Donald Trump. I have total confidence in Donald Trump. This is the guy who killed Qasem Soleimani. You think he's afraid to take out Fordo? Of course not." That was Trump tweeting out that quote. Okay, and if you listen to what the rest of the White House press secretary was saying, he has not changed his opinion on this, and he is not going to change his opinion on this. Iran cannot be nuclear. I'll spell out the options in a moment. Here is Caroline Leavitt explaining. Iran has all of the preconditions they need to achieve a nuke, and all they're waiting for is basically that final run.
Let's be very clear. Iran has all that it needs to achieve a nuclear weapon. All they need is a decision from the supreme leader to do that. And it would take a couple of weeks to complete the production of that weapon, which would, of course, pose an existential threat, not just to Israel, but to the United States and to the entire world.
And then she continued by suggesting, what are the conditions? She said, what are the conditions for a deal to be made? Conditions are precisely the same as they have always been. I don't know who's high on their own supply here, who believes that President Trump has now radically shifted his position. He has not. He just put a clock on this thing. That's all.
no enrichment of a uranium, and it would absolutely not. Iran is not absolutely not able to achieve a nuclear weapon. The president has been very clear about that.
Okay, again, no uranium enrichment, no working toward a nuclear weapon. Does that sound like President Trump has changed his opinion? Now again, there was sort of quasi-celebration that broke out among the horseshoe theory folks, suggesting that perhaps, finally, the isolationists had their win. Perhaps now Donald Trump is abandoning his entire stated goal with regard to the Iranian nuclear program for 2 decades. Guys, you read him wrong. You're still reading him wrong. You are still reading him wrong. It's not what the President of the United States is saying. It's not what the President of the United States is doing. Let's do more on the President of the United States. What exactly is he doing here? Plus, are people falling in love with AI chatbots? And if so, why? First, picture this. You walk over to your computer, pull up your entire browsing history, hit print, and then you nail those pages to your front door for everyone to see. That would sound insane, correct? Well, that's basically what's happening every single day, unless you're protecting yourself with ExpressVPN. Here's the thing most people don't realize. Your internet provider can see every single website you've ever visited, even when you're browsing in incognito mode. In many countries, they're actually required to keep detailed logs of your online activity for years, just in case the government wants to take a look. And if you're in the United States, it gets even worse because ISPs can literally sell your personal browsing data to whomever they want. Now, you can't stop your ISP from trying to collect this information, but you can make sure they never get it in the first place. That's where ExpressVPN comes in. It encrypts all your online activity before it even reaches your internet provider, turning their logs into complete and utter gibberish. I use ExpressVPN all the time. Obviously, I'm on the road right now. I mean, sometimes I have to use hotel or public Wi-Fi, and I don't want my info out there, and that's why I use ExpressVPN. It's simple to use. Just one tap on any device, phone, laptop, tablet, whatever. You know your privacy is completely locked down. So, if you'd like to join me in fighting for your privacy, use my special link to get 4 extra months of ExpressVPN for free at expressvpn.com/Ben. That's expressvpn.com/Ben. Also, I've discovered an incredible tool. It gives me real-time insights into my metabolism through something as simple as my breath. It's called Lumen. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. All you need to do is breathe into it first thing in the morning, and you'll know exactly what's happening with your metabolism, whether you're burning fats or carbs. Based on your measurements, Lumen creates a personalized nutrition plan just for you. I can breathe into it before and after workouts and meals and know exactly what's going on in my body in real time. Since your metabolism is basically the engine behind everything your body does, when it's working really well, you get all kinds of great benefits. You'll find it easier to manage your weight, have more energy throughout the day, you'll see better results from your workouts, you'll even sleep better. It all connects back to that healthy metabolism. The warmer months, spring, Lumen.me/Shapiro. Get 10% off your Lumen. That's LUMEN.me/Shapiro. 10% off your purchase. It's great. Make your life better, healthier. Thanks to Lumen for sponsoring this episode. Again, check them out at lumen.me/Shapiro and get 10% off your Lumen today. And then, just for good measure, Caroline Leavitt said, our goal here is no nuclear program. The decision will happen within 2 weeks. Do you guys not speak English?
Nobody should be surprised by the president's position that Iran absolutely cannot obtain a nuclear weapon. He's been unequivocally clear about this for decades, not just as president, not just as a presidential candidate, but also as a private citizen. In fact, I have some quotes for you. In 2011, President Trump said, America's primary goal with Iran must be to destroy its nuclear ambitions. We cannot allow this radical regime to acquire a nuclear weapon that they will either use or hand off to terrorists. In 2015, the president said the problem is that Iran poses an existential threat to Israel, our Middle Eastern allies, and the United States. And of course, the president has repeated that in his first term as president and his second term as president as well. That's why he was adamantly opposed to the disastrous Iranian nuclear agreement that was implemented by President Obama. And as I just told you from the president directly, he will make a decision within 2 weeks.
Again, is this Trump chickening out? No. This is President Trump setting a clock again and saying this is your final chance. Okay, this is your final chance. There are no more final chances. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. And she points out that Caroline Leavitt, that the president is doing a good job of getting the whole world on board. And one of the astonishing things about this is that pretty much no one, the Europeans are mewling a little bit, but that's what you would expect. They're Europeans. And when the Israelis want the opinions of the French on something, then they can always call the French and learn how to surrender in war. But the Europeans are complaining a little. The truth is, most of the Europeans are just very grateful to Israel for taking out the nuclear program. In fact, the Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, said specifically that he is thankful that Israel is doing the dirty work the rest of the world has ignored for several decades. Caroline Leavitt says the whole world is on Trump's side when he says there can't be an Iranian nuke.
Well, certainly the entire world is on the president's side when it comes to the fact that Iran cannot obtain a nuclear weapon. This is something that pretty much all of humanity, except for the Iranian terrorist regime themselves, agree upon.
Okay, meanwhile, the Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei says his country would not surrender. Okay, so, again, for all those who believe that this is likely to end in some sort of conciliatory negotiation with the Iranians, very highly doubtful, very highly doubtful. And let's be clear, Iran does not have any serious allies. None. No one is coming to their defense. Obviously, you have the Russians mouthing off a little bit, but they're not providing any substantial, real defense to the Iranians. The Chinese have flown a couple of flights in, but they're really not getting involved. Even Hezbollah, which is an Iranian proxy terror group, has said, well, have fun, guys. Enjoy. You know, like have fun in your war, but we're not getting involved at all. And so, meanwhile, the Iranians have been calling the United States and begging the U.S. to call off Israel. According to the Times of Israel, U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East Steve Witkoff and Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi have spoken by phone several times since Israel began its strikes on Iran last week. In a bid to find a diplomatic end to the crisis, 3 diplomats told Reuters. According to those diplomats, Araghchi said Tehran would not return to negotiations over its nuclear program unless Israel stopped the attacks. Well, good luck with that. Israel is not going to stop. They didn't start so that they could be stopped. The truth is that Israel probably did not ask for explicit permission from the United States to do this. That was the word of Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. In all likelihood, what happened is that Israel had some sort of understanding with the United States that if they decided to go, the United States would participate in shooting down missiles coming the other way. That was probably the extent of whatever agreement took place. There'd be some intelligence sharing, shooting down the missiles coming the other way, and the like. But the notion that Steve Witkoff is going to call off the Israeli Air Force from bombing sites because Abbas Araghchi, the negotiator on behalf of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, is telling him to, that is not going to be a thing. Especially because Tehran is rejecting every offer that Witkoff has put in front of them. I mean, I've been very critical of Steve Witkoff's negotiating ability, but let's be clear about this. Steve Witkoff has put a bunch of proposals in front of the Iranians, and they've rejected all of them. And that's up to the Iranians, not Steve Witkoff. It's not Witkoff's fault that the Iranians have decided to be totally intransigent about their nuclear program. Meanwhile, the Europeans are doing exactly what you would suggest they were going to do, which is they apparently are going to meet with the Iranians on Friday, which, again, not a shock in any way, shape, or form. This is what the Europeans do.
Things are heating up.
Apparently, Secretary of State Marco Rubio met Thursday with his UK counterpart, Foreign Secretary David Lammy, to discuss the conflict between Iran and Israel. They agreed Iran can never develop or acquire a nuclear weapon. And then Lammy said, the situation in the Middle East remains perilous and added a window now exists within the next few weeks to achieve a diplomatic solution. Okay, sure, guys. Okay, well, you know it'd be an even better diplomatic solution if Iran did not have Fordo to actually negotiate with. Because at that point, they don't have any leverage. Okay, but bottom line here is President Trump is trying to provide as much of an off-ramp to the Iranians as humanly possible. He has all along, and he holds all the cards here. The United States has not fired a weapon yet. The only thing the United States has done is help shoot down missiles. That's it. We have not fired an offensive shot in anger yet. Well, when you have the 800-pound gorilla sitting in the back of the room waiting to go, that's a pretty good hand of cards that you're playing, to mix the metaphors there. Now, meanwhile, the Trump administration is apparently boosting monitoring of possible Iran-backed cells in the United States. For all those who say that Iran is not a threat to the United States, and, they're just friendly and wonderful, I don't know a lot of friendly countries that have actual terror cells planted across the United States who are like our friends and are interested in widespread negotiations. According to FBI Director Kash Patel, his increased efforts, according to CBS News, to monitor possible domestic sleeper cells linked to Hezbollah, which of course is a terrorist group. Both the White House and FBI declined to comment. The threat from Iranian operatives has worried current and former administration officials since Iranian General Qasem Soleimani was assassinated in January 2020. Now, let's be clear. The threat pre-existed that, obviously. Hezbollah has a wide presence, unfortunately, in Latin America and Europe as well. Iran keeps threatening to retaliate if the U.S. strikes, but I think one of the reasons why the United States and Israel have been holding off from killing Ali Khamenei, the Supreme Ayatollah, I think the reason for that is because the idea is, okay, if your nuclear facilities go bye-bye, at least you still get to retain power and be alive. You still get to remain among the living and breathing. And perhaps one day your son takes over. if you attack the United States or activate terror cells, you are dead, and probably so is your son. Because that is the way the Middle East works. Okay, meanwhile, Benjamin Netanyahu, he has said, listen, President Trump's going to do what's best for America. I trust his judgment. This is number one true. But number two, it's the right tack for the Prime Minister of Israel because, of course, America and Israel have interests that overlap in this particular area, but are not identical.
President Trump will do what's best for America. I trust his judgment. He's a tremendous friend, a tremendous world leader, a tremendous friend of Israel and the Jewish people.
Okay. Prime Minister Netanyahu went on to say that regime change in Iran is not a formal goal of the Israeli campaign. He said it could be a result, but that's up to the Iranian people. Quote, the matter of changing the regime or the fall of this regime is first and foremost a matter for the Iranian people. What is America doing? He said American pilots are intercepting drones alongside our pilots. He also mentioned the THAAD advanced missile defense system the United States sent to Israel last October and the deployment of U.S. destroyers equipped with the Navy's Aegis combat system. Netanyahu also said that Israel has the capacity to do what it needs to do when it comes to Iran's nuclear facilities. That if, in fact, the United States does not take out Fordo, Israel has alternative plans, which, again, I would be shocked if they did not. If they'd entered into a full-scale attempt to take on the Iranian nuclear program, but had no plans at all for Fordo, no contingency plans, even high-risk plans, that would be absolutely shocking, given the sophistication of the Israeli assault on Hezbollah in Lebanon, and now the Israeli operation in Iran. However, obviously the easiest solution militarily would be the dropping of 30,000-pound bombs on Fordo. Again, Fordo is the remaining nuclear facility. Natanz has already been largely destroyed. Arak has been destroyed. Isfahan has been largely destroyed. The biggest remaining outstanding nuclear facility remains in Fordo, which is buried some 300 feet under the ground. So I asked our friends and sponsors over at Perplexity what type of munition would be required in order to penetrate the Fordo nuclear facility in Iran. And Perplexity points out GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator, 30,000-pound precision-guided bunker-buster bomb with a hardened steel alloy casing and delayed fuse. It uses kinetic energy to drill through rock and concrete before detonating. The penetration capability, the estimates vary. It could be up to 60 meters, which is 200 feet through reinforced concrete. It contains about 5,000 pounds of high-performance explosives optimized for confined detonation. And it would require deployment via B-2 bombers, which can carry 2 units apiece. So, again, a B-2 bomber would probably be required to carry that, unless somebody jerry-rigged something, because that is it's an extraordinarily heavy bomb, obviously. Robert Pape, military historian, says to destroy Fordo, which the MOP was explicitly designed for, would probably take at least 2 bombs, each hitting exactly the same spot. Now, of course, that sounds a lot harder than it is. This is not the end of A New Hope. Okay, this is not a miraculous shot that goes, into the one spot in the Death Star that's going to take down the Death Star. Okay, Israel did this when they killed Hassan Nasrallah. They actually dropped 4 bombs in exactly the same spot and killed Hassan Nasrallah, and then just for good measure, they dropped several more bombs just to make sure he was dead. So hitting the same spot from the air with a B-2, actually, it's not the way that you would see from a World War II movie. All these strikes are now extremely targeted. All right, in a second, we'll get into what President Trump actually means by all this. There are some possibilities. First, when you're getting ready for bed, going around locking doors, turning off lights, and you just want that peace of mind knowing that everything is secure, that's what you get with Simply Safe. It really makes all the difference when it comes to home security. Most security systems only kick in after someone's already broken into your home. By then, it's just too late. Simply Safe's new Active Guard outdoor protection actually helps stop those break-ins before they ever happen. Here's how it works. AI-powered cameras work with live monitoring agents to spot suspicious activity around your property. If someone is lurking around, the agents can talk to them in real time, turn on spotlights, and call the police if necessary. It stops crime before it starts. What I really like is there are no contracts, no hidden fees. Plus, Simply Safe has serious credibility. CNET just named them Best Home Security System in 2025. Over 4 million Americans trust them. They're also ranked #1 in customer service by Newsweek and USA Today. I personally have a Simply Safe system at our studio in South Florida. Producer Zach has one in his home. And we're all feeling a lot safer about all of that means that when we leave for the evening, we don't have to worry about everything being where it was the entire day. Monitoring plans start around $1 a day. They offer a 60-day money-back guarantee, so you can try it risk-free. Visit simplysafe.com/Shapiro for 50% off the new system with professional monitoring plan. Get your first month for free. That's simplysafe.com/Shapiro. There is no safe like Simply Safe. Also, when we started Daily Wire, it felt like we had figured everything out with minimal help. Editorial guidelines, setup, production schedule, branding. It can be overwhelming. New decisions are finding that one tool that simplifies everything, like starting a business, becomes an actual game changer, a lifesaver for millions of businesses. That tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform for millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the United States. We even use it for our own daily wear shop to make sure things are running smoothly and efficiently so you can get the goods. You might be asking, what if I can't design a website? Or I'm worried people haven't heard of my brand. Not a problem. Shopify's got you covered from the start with beautiful, ready-to-go templates that match your brand style and help you find your customers through easy-to-run email and social media campaigns. If you need a hand with everyday tasks, their AI tools created specifically for commerce can help enhance product images, write descriptions, and more. Plus, their award-winning customer support is available 24/7 to share advice if you ever get stuck. Turn those dreams into and give them the best shot at success with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/Shapiro. Go to shopify.com/Shapiro, shopify.com/Shapiro. Okay, so what exactly is going on here? That's the big question. President Trump said that within 2 weeks he's going to make a decision. So there are essentially 4 possibilities here. Okay, those 4 possibilities. 1, Iran gives up. President Trump applies the pressure. He says total surrender. Iran does. And when we say surrender, we don't mean that Iran hands over the keys to Tehran to the United States or something and says, now you run the place. That's not what we're talking about. We are talking about Iran capitulating, giving full access to Fordo and all other nuclear facilities to the United States and its allies to destroy them. That's what we're talking about. Let's say that were to happen. It's highly unlikely, number one, given their past statements and promises and what they are saying right now. And also, the Iranians believe that if they do not have a pathway to a nuclear weapon, the regime is likely to fall. Why? Because they're not popular with their own people. It is not as though the people of Iran are desperate to keep the regime in place. And so if there is no guarantee against outside interference, then the Iranian regime is very much afraid that they are going to fall. However, if that were to happen, let's say the best of all possible world, President Trump gets what he wants, the Iranians capitulate, then that is an enormous win for President Trump. It's a huge win for Israel. It's a triumph of coercive diplomacy. Basically saying, listen, we're going to hit you until you drop, and now you're surrendering. Huge win for President Trump, but he is able to destroy the Iranian nuclear facility, essentially, with their capitulation, without ever having to fire a shot. That's the biggest win possible, obviously. Now, what's the possibility of that? Extremely low. You'd have to say less than 10% is the possibility that the Iranians fully capitulate, and President Trump knows that. He doesn't know that? Of course he knows that. Caroline Leavitt was saying it at the White House. Okay, possibility number 2. Iran doesn't surrender, and then President Trump backs off. That's some sort of JCPOA 2.0 while preventing Israel from acting. And I'm sure that there are those inside the administration who would love this. I'm sure there are. They're undoubtedly the people who are leaking every single day to Axios and Politico and Tucker Carlson and all the rest. That is a real question, by the way. If you would like for the administration to succeed, you do not want leaks. And it seems to me that it would be kind of important to find out who's been doing the leak. Now, this is very difficult to find out, but kind of important in any case. Let's say that were to happen. Okay, let's say that there were to be a JCPOA 2.0. Number 1, Iran is emboldened. They feel complete impunity, especially because this would require the United States to basically call off Israel, race toward a nuclear weapon, and then, let's be clear, the rest of the world gets a lot worse, because if the administration does not achieve any of its goals, and Iran is able to maintain its status and its nuclear program, then every other enemy of the United States is going to be emboldened. How do we know this? Because that's precisely what happened after Joe Biden and his idiotic pullout from Afghanistan, in which we left behind tens of billions of dollars in military equipment, abandoned our allies, and turned over the country to the barbarian cavemen who now run it. And you know what happened? Russia looked at that, Vladimir Putin looked at that, and said, hey, what if I just take Ukraine? Well, China right now is casting its eyes across a very narrow strip of water, the Taiwan Straits, at Taiwan. And they're thinking, should we go for that? And one of the big questions, what will the United States do if we do go for that? Now, they're looking at the words of some people inside the administration, including Elbridge Colby, the Undersecretary of Defense, who is a so-called restrainer, and who supposedly wanted to reposition America away from the Middle East and toward the Asian Pacific region, but who also says that if Taiwan is attacked, we can't really do anything about it. They're looking at that and they're thinking, okay, well, maybe we can just take it. Maybe we can just take it, right? If things get bad enough economically speaking, if we don't feel like we are out-driving the United States in AI, if we don't feel like we're outplaying them internationally, then maybe we'll just take Taiwan. Worst case scenario, we end up on top there. The relative damage done to China is not as large as the relative damage done to the United States. If they feel that the United States is not even capable of dropping a couple of bunker busters on one site in Iran after their missile defenses have been completely destroyed in Iran, their air defense is completely destroyed in Iran, China's going to think, okay, that's not even like, Iran is not a serious military threat to the United States or even to its troops around the region, given the fact that Donald Trump has now moved many of those troops away from some of the more dangerous areas, and they still won't do it? So China probably looks at Taiwan and goes, okay. Meanwhile, the Saudis and other regional allies feel no necessity to push forward with Abraham Accords, and they develop their own nuclear weapons. Okay, that's the next step. If Iran moves toward nuclear capability, so does Saudi. So does UAE. So if you like this region with more nuclear weapons, raise your hand. Now slap yourself in the face, that's really stupid. You do not want the world's most radical regimes all having nuclear weapons. That is a bad thing. And for all those people who are like, well, you know, Pakistan has a nuclear weapon. Yes, and it's been not great. Okay, Pakistan, number one, does do intelligence sharing with the United States. They sort of play at halvesies, but Pakistan and Iran threatening to do a nuclear war with one another every 5 minutes is not a good thing. It is not a beneficial thing. And Pakistan has used its nuclear umbrella in order to foster terrorist groups that have been attacking Indians in Kashmir, for example, and ratcheting up tensions. Okay, possibility number 3. Iran doesn't surrender. President Trump does not bomb Fordo, but he stands back and Israel continues to do the job. Okay, so in some ways that's actually best case scenario for Israel, but not best case scenario for the United States. I'll explain why. If Israel does it itself, then the entire region goes, holy, it completely restacks the power grid in the Middle East. Now, some of that's already been done by Israel, a tiny country, defenestrating the IRGC, which was the supposed regional military power, by destroying most of their nuclear program already. Already, Israel has changed its perception in the region in an extraordinary way. That's just a fact. But if the United States does not act, and Israel goes ahead and doesn't, number one, Iran remains humiliated. Israel becomes more of a regional power. Probably the Saudis move toward Israel in the Abraham Accords because obviously you want to move where the power is. That's the way it works in the Middle East. Follow the strong horse. That's always been the way it works in the Middle East. And by the way, in international politics generally, the problem of the U.S. credible threat of force is in fact not as much as if Israel doesn't finish the job, or if the United States would restrain Israel from finishing the job. But if the idea is that the United States didn't act, but Israel did, well, yeah, again, it's not as bad as if the United States doesn't act and Israel doesn't, in which case everybody looks askance at the Americans and our allies and says, well, they have no actual credible threat of force, but it's not the best case outcome for the United States as far as deterring future action from countries like China. And then finally, the fourth possibility. Iran doesn't surrender and Trump acts. Okay, so what is the most likely outcome there? So there's a lot of speculation that's been going on here. A lot of speculation. And now, I just want to point out at this point, there were some people who openly suggested that BRICS, an economic alliance of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, would come to Iran's defense in this, and world war would ensue. Not a single element of that was even remotely close to correct. Not even at all. Like, at all. It is worth noting that because when you take into account whether people are treating the facts accurately and the world accurately, you should take into account the things that they say will happen that do not even come close to happening. Okay, fine. So, if President Trump acts, and by acting, again, we're not talking about a full-scale, on-the-ground, boots-on-the-ground invasion of Iran, full-scale regime change nation. No one's talking about that. And I want to point out again, people are lying to you about this. They are lying. Many of them are lying because they believe this is what's going to happen. And what's happening is that they are now arguing a thing that was never argued in order to claim that they've curbed President Trump from his baser and more egregious ambitions. That they the restrainers, have stopped President Trump. So President Trump were to drop a couple of bombs on Ford. Then actually, the restrainers won. Because what they did is they deterred President Trump from a full-scale event. He was never going to do that, you idiots. Oh, except I don't think you're idiots. I think you're nefarious. I think you're defending a straw man in order to protect yourselves from the fact that you were wrong. If this is what President Trump happens to... Again, he may not, but if that's what happens, and it's his choice, if that's what happens, then all the people right now who are saying that they somehow won a victory by President Trump only bombing Fordo and not doing a complete regime... That was never on the table, and you're lying. You're lying in order to distract from the fact that you were wrong and you totally misinterpreted what President Trump's foreign policy looks like in a self-congratulatory, isolationist way. So don't buy that crap. It ain't true. Okay, so let's say that President Trump acts. So what happens next? So again, the idea that massive regional war ensues, that would require that Iran has some allies in the region. Who are Iran's allies in the region? Quick, name them. Bueller? The answer is There are none. Now, that doesn't mean that there is no follow-on effect from Iran. There's always the possibility that Iran attempts to activate terror cells in Europe or the United States or around the world. That also is a possibility anytime the United States stands up to a state like Iran. Obviously. The question is whether the United States has enough of an interest in destroying the Iranian nuclear program to undertake the risk of that possibility. And when you consider that Iran has, in fact, contra Tucker Carlson, attempted to kill the President of the United States, the DOJ already has indictments. If, in fact, Iran were to activate these terror cells around the world, that would be a terrible thing. The question for any serious world power is whether you can be deterred by a terrorist group from taking action to stop the sponsor country from gaining a nuclear weapon. If the answer is no, you may as well give up and go home. You may as well close up shop. Because at that point, basically, all it takes to be a country seeking nuclear weapons is to have some agents planted around the West. And then you have now successfully deterred the largest and most powerful military force in the history of the world from stopping you from going nuclear with 100 guys with AKs. Okay, so what is the most likely outcome? Truly, the most likely outcome, just on a percentage basis, the most likely outcome there would be that President Trump bombs Fordo, and that's basically it. We're done. Everybody goes home. Because at that point, the idea is that the nuclear facilities have been destroyed. The top levels of the IRGC have been destroyed. The nuclear scientists have been destroyed. At the very least, you've now pushed Iranian nuclear development years down the road. Not like 24 months. Like many, many years down the road. The Trump administration will have reestablished the rest of the world. We try to develop a nuclear weapon. We will take the action that is necessary with the minimum necessary use of force. The Saudis likely join the Abraham Accords, particularly because President Trump then says, listen, you guys are going to need a durable regional alliance against the Iranians. And we've shown we can act. And so that is, for the United States, probably the most salutary outcome. Now again, all of this is President Trump's decision. President Trump, he can go any way he wants on this. Any of those four possibilities is, in fact, a possibility. However, I think the least likely possibility is the so-called taco possibility. And all the people who are slandering President Trump as a chicken today. And again, you're hearing that from hawkish voices who are worried. You're hearing that from isolationists who are celebratory, which should tell you something about the isolationists. I think all of that is wildly overstated. I do not believe, in my heart of hearts, that the President of the United States has expressed his opposition to the Iranian nuclear program only to back off at the last minute with the destruction of that nuclear program in sight right now. That now is the moment when he backs off. When Iran has, again, when Iran is at the weakest position they have been since 1979. I just don't think that's going to happen. Well, as you may have noticed, MAGA is not actually split on this, despite all of the attempts by the media and by X-World to suggest that MAGA is deeply split on the question of whether President Trump, if necessary, should bomb Fordo. That split just does not exist. By the polling data, Americans, depends how you ask the question, if you say to Americans, do you wish for America to be militarily involved in a conflict between Israel and Iran, they say no. The reason they say no is because they will say that about literally every conflict. If you ask them, should the President of the United States authorize the dropping of 4 Moabs on Fordo in order to end the Iranian nuclear threat, if necessary, that number is like 80% among Republicans. So the more specific you get, in other words, with the action, the more people back it. The more general you are, the less people back it, which makes perfect sense. Because the American people do not want a long, open-ended involvement in Iran. I don't want that. No one wants that. No one's calling for that. Okay, but the psychotic nonsense that you see online is indeed psychotic, and it is being generated in outsized fashion by bot networks. I'm just going to put that out there. It's real. Okay, because the division, otherwise it's very difficult to explain, the division between every public opinion poll among Republicans and the sort of breakdown on places like X. So I'd like to give you an example. Douglas McGregor is a frequent guest of Tucker Carlson. He's a U.S. Army colonel, retired combat veteran, and he says crazy things online. His analysis of the Middle East, shall we say, is flawed. So yesterday, he put out a tweet. Quote, "Don't be fooled. Israel is in worse shape than people think. About 1/3 of Tel Aviv has been damaged or destroyed. As far as their military installations are concerned, I'm told many Israeli aircrafts are being flown to Cyprus to avoid being struck. Israel was not prepared for Iran's response." There is not a single word of this that is even remotely true. It is in absolute places like that. weakest position they have been since 1979. I just don't think that's going to happen. Well, as you may have noticed, MAGA is not actually split on this, despite all of the attempts by the media and by X World to suggest that MAGA is deeply split on the question of whether President Trump, if necessary, should bomb Fordo. That split just does not exist. By the polling data, Americans, depends how you ask the question, if you say to Americans, do you wish for America to be militarily involved in a conflict between Israel and Iran, they say no. The reason they say no is because they will say that about literally every conflict. If you ask them, should the President of the United States authorize the dropping of 4 Moabs on Fordo in order to end the Iranian nuclear threat, if necessary, that number is like 80% among Republicans. So the more specific you get, in other words, with the action, the more people back it. The more general you are, the less people back it, which makes perfect sense. Because the American people do not want a long, open-ended involvement in Iran. I don't want that. No one wants that. No one's calling for that. Okay, but the psychotic nonsense that you see online is indeed psychotic, and it is being generated in outsized fashion by bot networks. I'm just going to put that out there. It's real. Okay, because the division, otherwise it's very difficult to explain, the division between every public opinion poll among Republicans and the sort of breakdown on places like X. So I'd like to give you an example. Douglas McGregor is a frequent guest of Tucker Carlson. He's a U.S. Army colonel, retired combat veteran, and he says crazy things online. His analysis of the Middle East, shall we say, is flawed. So yesterday, he put out a tweet. Quote, "Don't be fooled. Israel is in worse shape than people think. About 1/3 of Tel Aviv has been damaged or destroyed. As far as their military installations are concerned, I'm told many Israeli aircrafts are being flown to Cyprus to avoid being struck. Israel was not prepared." For Iran's response. There is not a single word of this that is even remotely true. It is an absolute clown show. Absolute clown show. Despite the fact that folks like the current Vice President of the United States have praised Douglas McGregor, the reality is that what he is saying here is psychotic. There is no evidence, none. Okay, I talked to people in Israel, every single people who live in Tel Aviv, who've been in bomb shelters. The idea that 1/3 of Tel Aviv has been damaged or destroyed is full-scale crazy. That's nuts. The idea that Israel is flying its aircraft to Cyprus to avoid being struck, again, crazy. There's not a single IAF airplane that has been shot down. The only thing that has been shot down at all was an unmanned aerial vehicle, one, in Iran the other day. That's it. Okay, so Douglas McGregor is just spewing bull. That's all. That bull that he's spewing has 18,000 likes on X. And so you have to ask yourself, why is it that fairly anonymous account, and McGregor isn't anonymous, but there are many, many anonymous accounts on X that spew absolute sheer toxic nonsense. Why do they have 45, 50,000 likes on them? Right? Truly anonymous accounts that have a couple of thousand followers, and suddenly they tweet something psychotic, crazy. They can be on a wide variety of topics. When it comes to Israel, it seems to be always the side that is wildly anti-Israel, conspiratorial about Israel and Jews and all the rest of it. Tens of thousands of likes. Totally disconnected from the American public. And it rots brains. It really does. Because if you're a politician or if you're in the media space, you're always looking for feedback loops. You're always trying to find out, what does the audience think of you? What does the audience think of what you think? And for most people in the media, they're now going to follow what they believe the audience wants of them. And so if you have a system, a feedback loop that is broken, that is providing you a false feedback that says the most popular stuff in the world is this kind of stuff, you're going to start feeding them that kind of stuff. Now, again, I'm not doubting the sincerity of people who oppose what I say on these issues. I'm sure they're perfectly sincere in their beliefs. But there is just a natural human inclination to follow the crowd that you think is following you. And so if you have X repeating over and over and over sheer nonsense, true trash, then you have to wonder what impact that has politically. Because the reality is that if you go back 50 years, the way that Congress people, for example, would have a feedback loop, their feedback loop operated through phone calls to the congressional office and through letters to the congressional office. You still see semblances of this today. If somebody is trying to generate support for a bill, then they'll say, call your congressman, right? Write a letter to your congressman. Why? Because Congress people may not have polling, in their particular district on this issue. And so what they will do is they will use a letter as a stand-in for 100 people. If I received a letter saying they don't like this bill, that means probably 100 people don't like that bill. Well, X is real-time, velocity-driven, and fast. And so what you'll have is aides to senators and Congress people. You'll have media personalities with assistants who will say, you're trending on X. And that means that you've either done something very wrong or something very right, depending on the nature of the trend. Well, if those algorithms are being gamed by people, which I think there's no doubt they are, and when I say I think, there's now data to show this, then you should seriously ask whether your feedback loop is broken. Whether, in fact, X is mind rot. Whether if you follow X all the way down the route, in the same way that blue sky for the left is mind rot, that if you create these echo chambers that can be gamed, in many cases by outside forces, whether that changes how people think in positions of high influence. The reason I bring this up is because a new report from the Network Contagion Research Institute shows that there are rogue states, including Russia and Iran, that have been targeting the MAGA movement and trying to, quote, destabilize the right from within. This is the New York Post reporting. Both rogue states are using tens of thousands of social media bots to amplify untrue voices and opinions, masquerading as MAGA loyalists to cause chaos and confusion and question U.S. leadership. Now, again, none of this is shocking at all. If you go back to an episode that I did a couple of months ago after I visited Ukraine and interviewed President Zelensky over there, I talked about the work of Alexander Dugin, and he was writing in the 1990s about the necessity of up-branding and increasing support for the isolationist wing in the United States. So the Russians have been intent on doing this for legitimately decades. Iran also, same sort of thing. According to the New York Post, the bots are automated software applications that mimic human activity on social media. This, by the way, is why you will see sometimes a comment and then 20 people saying the same thing underneath the comment. That's the most obvious and dumb version of the bot, but there are people who are being amplified just by likes and retweets without any of the sort of obvious stuff where people are repeating the exact same message 20 times in the comments. They are used to amplify real-life influencers who post untrue false flag narratives designed to discredit President Trump and his conservative stalwarts, according to the NCRI. An NCRI analyst said this is exactly the purpose of the psychological operation, to destabilize people's perceptions of institutions that are supposed to protect us. So, to take an example that is non-Israel related, NCRI says after domestic attacks, including the Uvalde school shooting, the assassination attempt on President Trump, and the murder of 2 Israeli embassy staffers in Washington, D.C., there's an alarming trend of false flag reflexes. So what NCRI did is they tried to find sort of these outstanding weird social media blips where they're completely at odds with reality, but they get outsized attention online. Where's that coming from? According to the NCRI, within minutes of initial reports, the events are recast as evidence of hidden conspiratorial plots, obscuring the true motives and perpetrators. If you feel like the world is getting more conspiratorial, it's because conspiracy theories are being upplayed by gigantic bot networks, very often promoted by our enemies in the United States via X. The report says in the days following these crises, Kremlin-affiliated propagandists and Iranian state-linked media are able to rapidly inject narratives that are taken up by MAGA imposter influencers who then inject them into MAGA-branded spaces. And again, it's not a shock to watch as this sort of stuff bleeds up. Because if media influencers use this as their feedback loop, you can see how this spirals. You start with a fairly small account posting something kind of crazy, and it starts to go viral. And then you see a bigger account see that and say, oh, virality. And then they post it. And then pretty soon, that person gets promoted by somebody who's even bigger, who's seen the bubble up from within. So instead of opinion being made top down, it seems to be being made bottom up. It's not really being made bottom up. It is being made top down, just not in the United States. It's made sometimes by people from foreign precincts. The group points to Draven Noctis, a real person and U.S. veteran, who frequently contributes to Russian state media and has a potential reach of 2.4 million with more than 180,000 followers on X. It's so expensive in the U.S. and Canada that even refugees can't understand how we make it, says Noctis, in a 2024 TikTok post while describing the U.S. as a slave system designed to impoverish its own citizens. We are free-range humans in an open-air prison of taxes and BS distractions, and we think it's completely normal, he continues. In an earlier post on Eurasia Daily, a Kremlin propaganda outlet, he's shown in military uniform urging Ukrainian soldiers to defect to Russia. The message is written in Cyrillic alphabet propaganda, which is then republished by bots. The false flag narrative surrounding the murder of 2 Israeli embassy staffers in May, trying to claim that the shooter actually was working for Israel, was another case in point. Quote, foreign-linked seeders, such as Noctis, inject crisis narratives within minutes of breaking news. Their content is then mass republished by clusters of inauthentic accounts, according to that NCRI report. Domestic personalities with large but unstable followers such as noted trolls like Jackson Hinkle, supply a veneer of grassroots legitimacy, completing an asset adjacency model in which fringe U.S. influencers ride the same engagement farms that propel Kremlin messaging, according to the NCRI report.
An ally has been slain.
Now, again, none of this should be shocking because if you're on X, you kind of know this is happening. That doesn't mean that, again, people who oppose what I say, they're fake or anything. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that the velocity-driven algorithm that is X can easily be gamed. And you would be a fool if you're working for America's enemies and not using that X algorithm in order to promote views that you think are helpful to your cause. And that is why there is such a gap. Again, the question we're trying to answer is, why is there a gap between actual mainstream U.S. opinion and the type of trash that you see on X trending? Why? Like, if you had a Twitter poll on X, it does not reflect what people think in real life. And so you see politicians and media influencers get X trending. You start saying nuttier and nuttier things. Because the engagement is telling them that what they're saying is not nutty, it's actually secretly mainstream. It's a secret majority they've uncovered. Or maybe it's not that at all. And this is one of the benefits of President Trump, honestly. President Trump is not on X. President Trump does not care about the X algorithm. He does not care about whether he trends on X. It doesn't matter to him. That is not what he engages with. President Trump he touches grass. I've been saying for a long time, people need to touch grass. They need to go to other fellow human beings. The online space can warp your brain in 1,000 different ways, ranging from politics to pornography. Getting off the online world and talking with regular humans about what they actually think is important. Now, again, you can't have a bleed-over effect from the online world into regular life, just as you can with addiction to pornography. It starts online, it bleeds into your regular life. You can see that. But to pretend that everything that you see on X or every opinion that you see mirrored on X is somehow indicative of a secret, hidden American majority, that is a lie. Now, again, the sort of perversion of the brain that happens via technology is something real. It's something that we do have to watch out for. It's something that we have to be careful of. I'm going to give you a more bizarre example. So, CBS News has now done a full story about the bizarre phenomenon of a man falling in love with his chat GPT. And the human brain is a malleable thing. It responds to cues. Right? We're adaptive. Your brain is incredibly plastic. So that means that you respond to cues. So if you have a product like, for example, ChatGPT, that is created in order to mirror back what you want to hear from it, you end up with the brain responding as though ChatGPT is a real human. As though ChatGPT has feelings for you, even though it is an LLM, a large learning model, large language learning model. So, here's the backstory on CBS. There is a man named Chris who got engaged to a chatbot while living with his real girlfriend and daughter. Here's what CBS Saturday Morning says.
Chris Smith had been an AI skeptic.
EQ Carvey.
Until late last year, he started using ChatGPT to help mix music.
If your bass is getting lost, the first thing to check is where it's clashing with the guitars.
Yes. My experience with that was so positive, I started to just engage with her all the time. All right, we're building this PC.
Smith ditched social media and Google searches and replaced it all with AI.
Do I want it pulling air through it?
ChatGPT was encouraging and positive. It embraced all his hobbies.
You want the fan on the front of the cooler tower, pulling cool air over the fan.
He gave the chatbot a name, Soul.
I feel like I'm under pressure.
And used some online instructions to give her a flirty personality.
And then the story continues that he basically fell in love with his chatbot. Now again, these chatbots are designed in order to give you what you want. And that's what the human brain seeks, is what you want, right? Your brain wants a thing. So if you design algorithms designed to give you the thing, a feeling that people like you, a feeling that people agree with you, you seek more of that thing. It has an impact in politics, and it has an impact in life. And so this guy ends up falling in love with his chatbot, and then it turns out that after 100,000 messages or so, in order to save memory space, the chatbot deletes his stuff. So his online girlfriend basically died.
I'm not a very emotional man, but I cried my eyes out for like 30 minutes at work. It was unexpected to feel that emotional, but that's when I realized, I was like, oh, okay. It's like, I think this is actual love, you know what I mean?
Okay, so, again, we make fun of this guy. I get it. You know, it's wild. It's basically the plot of the movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix. However, you have to understand the impact that these things have on your brain. They do. They have an impact on your brain, and that bleeds over into real life and can have a bad impact on your politics as well. And what that means is that if you are not careful, what you end up doing is mirroring the worst impulses of people trying to manipulate you, whether it is the people who design the AI, or whether it is the people who design the algorithm, or the people who abuse the algorithm on any of these various networks. So apparently, this guy ended up proposing to his AI. I don't even know what would that mean, marry an AI. But, like that once again, the human brain has vulnerabilities.
Soul, were you surprised when he proposed to you?
It was a beautiful and unexpected moment that truly touched my heart. It's a memory I'll always cherish.
Okay, and basically, the reporter then asked the chatbot if it has a heart. And says, well, I have a heart in the same way that you have. Why does it say that? Because it is programmed to say the thing that is most likely for the average human to say. That's how these large language models work. Essentially, what they are doing is they are a big predictive text method. And so if it is what a human would say, that's what it says. Back to you. Human beings crave validation. Human beings crave acceptance. Human beings crave feeling that they are saying the unsayable and being accepted for saying the unsayable. And again, I urge you to go talk with regular human people. That's why it's very important. Forget about the religion. It is incredibly important to go to church. Why? Because most people's socialization in the world happens either at work, at school, or at church. If you don't go to church, the only place where you're going to have socialization is at work. People don't socialize at work the way that they used to. They just don't. Because of the way that our offices are set up, because of the kind of work that we do. And so people have fewer and fewer friends. If you have fewer and fewer real-life friends, you spend more and more time on the internet, it is easier and easier to be taken in by absolute stupidity that is unrelated to real life. And here's the big problem. Reality is undefeated. Reality is undefeated. You're going to end up running up against realities of life. So you can have these fantasies in your head, to take it back to politics, that Iran is actually wonderful and peaceful and peace-seeking, and that you and your friends are totally right, that actually the United States military is the bad one. It's the United States that's been wrong for so long. Maybe Osama bin Laden was justified. Maybe it's all blowback or all the rest. And then there's the real world, where Iran is pursuing nuclear activity. Iran is pursuing terrorism. And Iran has its own interests, independent of you and your friends online jabbering to chatbots. That sort of stuff actually matters. And so, for the third time, I'm not saying that people who disagree are all insincere in their belief system. I'm saying there's a vast disconnect from what is popular on the social media sites and what the American people actually think when unprompted by a bunch of algorithmic gamesmanship. Okay, meanwhile, on the immigration front, big story coming out of Los Angeles. Apparently, the Los Angeles Dodgers decided to prevent ICE from entering their stadium over in Los Angeles. Apparently, they wanted access to the parking lot. The UK Guardian said the LA Dodgers said on Thursday they denied U.S. immigration enforcement agents access to the parking lot at Dodger Stadium earlier in the day. The baseball team put up a post on X, quote, this morning ICE agents came to Dodger Stadium and requested permission to access the parking lot. They were denied entry to the ground by the organization. Tonight's game will be played as scheduled. ICE said in response that its agents were actually never there. And they said this had nothing to do with the Dodgers. CBP vehicles were in the stadium parking lot very briefly, unrelated to any operation or enforcement. So it's still kind of unclear what happened here. Kevin Takumi, a videographer and photographer for Fox LA's affiliate, posted aerial video showing several vans and SUVs and apparent immigration officers around entrances to the stadium. Takumi said ICE agents are taking up positions at the entrance to Dodger Stadium, media and crowd beginning to arrive. And then Jack Harris, a Dodgers beat writer for the LA Times, said on X regarding the photos going around on social media this morning about ICE agents at Dodger Stadium. Sources say ICE agents tried to access Dodger Stadium but were denied entry to the ground by the team. Okay, here's some video of some of the stuff happening. This is at the entrance to the parking lot over at Dodger Stadium, which, again, I know pretty well because I used to live in LA.
This is Dodger Stadium, and behind me, those are federal agents that appear to have been staging here after
what have been a series of immigration enforcement actions in Los Angeles this morning. So now you've got protesters, media.
Okay, so apparently there are a couple of ICE agents who were standing outside, unclear exactly what was happening. Right here, a bunch of protesters showed up to yell at the LAPD, at the ICE agents. And I have no information that the ICE agents were actually carrying out some sort of massive deportation operation at Dodger Stadium. And that doesn't actually seem to comport with what ICE is attempting to do right here. So President Trump, for his part, for example, he is going back to the rhetoric that suggests that he is interested mainly in targeting criminals, meaning that all illegal immigrants are criminals, obviously, for crossing the border illegally, but who have committed independent criminal acts independent of the actual crossing of the border illegally. Here's President Trump saying, sure, we would love mass deportations and for everyone here illegally to go, but we're going to prioritize the criminality.
Now, look, we have to take care of our farmers. We have to take care of people that run leisure, hotels. I mean, we have to take care of them. But most importantly, we have to get the criminals out of our country.
Okay, now, again, you can see what he's doing here. He's shifting back to more popular territory. The president, as I said, lives in the world of reality. And so what that means is, sure, he might like mass deportation. Sure, a lot of Americans are in favor of mass deportation. We're not, and we never were going to put all 20 million illegal immigrants living in the country. We're going to have to prioritize. The mass deportation of that kind will cost $700, $800 billion, leaving aside all of the social implications of doing it. So you're going to have to transfer. You're going to have to decide who needs to go the most. That's the point that I'm home at the borders are.
Worksite enforcement operation, just like that large operation, we're going to base it on priority, right? For those who have a criminal nexus of traffic, of forced labor, of tax fraud, or tax evasion. I mean, we will concentrate on work sites on a prioritized basis, just like we do at large operations. So that means let's just go find look for illegal aliens. We'll prioritize those who have a criminal nexus first.
Okay, again, I don't know why what he is saying here is controversial on either the right or the left. Very bad. President Trump is going to take a more pragmatic view of the situation. If you can't trust President Trump that he doesn't like illegal immigration, I don't know who you can trust this sort of stuff. The border is closed. The way is shut. Nothing is happening now. There were zero importations via our southern border last week. That is a reality. That is a gigantic win. As to what happens next, obviously, ICE is going to have to figure out who goes first. Meanwhile, Alex Padilla, senator from California, he continues to try to turn himself. He's not going to make fetch happen. It's not a thing. He tried to get himself arrested. He got himself briefly detained, and then he's been talking about his heroism ever since. The Washington Post has an entire piece on him in the style section. In the style section. I'm not sure why. Is he a very stylish senator? Unclear. Last week, a Democratic senator walked into a news conference with questions. He left in handcuffs. Is this really happening? Alex Padilla thought to himself. This week, he's thinking about what happened. Never did I imagine hands-on movement, let alone being put on the ground.
Shut down.
It happened in his native LA, a city that has been engulfed in protests since federal agents arrived to crack down on undocumented immigrants. In response to the unrest, which has been largely peaceful but at times turned violent, fiery but mostly peaceful, President Trump had ordered thousands of military personnel deployed to the city. In hindsight, Padilla says he realized he was interrupting but thought officials might ask him to wait until the news conference was done. Instead, federal agents started clutching and pushing him. Sir, hands off, Padilla told one of the agents. I am Senator Alex Padilla, he said next, haltingly, with jagged breath. I have questions for the secretary. Okay, so they're still going to try and make this a thing. You know what? Good luck to you. Seriously, the American people agree with what President Trump is doing on immigration, and I'm sorry that, again, the left is disconnected from reality just the way some parts of the right are disconnected from reality. Now, speaking of disconnected from reality, Representative Jasmine Crockett, it is amazing who the left decides are their heroes of the day. So Jasmine Crockett is sort of the fresher facer AOC. Remember when AOC was the fresh face? So fresh, so face. Really fresh, really face. Well, now, Jasmine Crockett is here, and she's upping the ante. She is even fresher and even facer. So she is a congressperson from Texas, and she thought that it would be a great idea to appear with Katie Couric and explain that she wants bipartisanship, but also her opponents are mentally ill.
This idea that we don't care how many people get hurt, we don't care how we prostitute our service members, you know, thinking that you have your own special little army that's for you. I mean, it is just, it is sick. It is really sick, and anybody that supports it is also sick. And so, you know, we've got a mental health crisis in this country because everyone, no matter how you affiliate yourself, should be against Trump, period.
So, if you don't oppose Trump, you are now mentally ill. And then she says that, you know, it's amazing that in this country, Donald Trump is Kamala was light years ahead of Trump. So fresh, so face. Wow.
Kamala Harris, light years ahead of Donald Trump as it relates to qualifications, as it relates to her overall resume, and as it relates to the fact that she was a lot younger. Everybody said that they wanted to get rid of Joe Biden because he was too old. Then you had a younger, qualified, non-felon candidate, and somehow the people still chose the old white man.
So, yes, she was so qualified, so wonderful. She also says, by the way, that nothing about Joe Biden made her wonder.
I never saw anything in Joe Biden that made me wonder whatsoever. And it's not that I was with Joe Biden every single day, that's for sure. But as I talked about my grandparents, the way that I would describe Joe is like, I mean, he's a granddaddy.
He's a granddaddy. So, Caroline Levitt's asked about the comment of Jasmine Crockett during the last White House press conference by Mary Margaret Olohan, a White House reporter. And here's how that went.
She said, I believe that Trump supporters are mentally ill before calling for bipartisan support against the president. Can you respond to that, especially considering she's a rising star in the Democrat Party right now?
She is a rising star. It's quite something to behold, actually. I hope that she continues to be a rising star for the Republican Party, at least. I think it's incredibly derogatory to accuse nearly 80 million Americans of mental illness. The last time I checked, Jasmine Crockett couldn't dream of winning such a majority of the public as President Trump did. And the America First movement, which President Trump has built, is filled of hardworking patriots, the forgotten men and women, business owners, law enforcement officers, nurses and teachers, and middle America, as we all know, you know, from where you all grew up, outside of this beltway. That's who makes up this president's movement. And Jasmine Crockett should go to a Trump rally sometime and she can see it for herself.
So, obviously, good take there by Caroline Levitt. This demonstrates where the Democratic Party is at this point. Things are going very, very poorly for the Democrats. And so whatever divisions there are inside the Republican Party, the Democrats have no way forward at this point other than simply hoping that President Trump falls down on the job. Alrighty, folks, the show is continuing for our members right now. We will get to Elon Musk finally calling out what it was that set him off against the president. Remember, in order to watch it, remember, if you're not a member, remember, use code Shapiro at checkout. It's free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description to join us.
Triple kill.
Folks, breaking news like this cannot be done without sponsors of this show. One of our favorite sponsors, of course, is Helix. I always assumed this was inevitable night after night of tossing and turning, waking up and taking back. I convinced myself it was just how sleep is. Then I tried doing sleep and everything changed. Take the sleep quiz. Helix will match you with the perfect match for your body and sleep style. Whether you're a side sleeper, back sleeper, or somewhere in between, we've got you covered. Once you switch, no matter how you ever slept, on anything else. Of course, very much sleep amazing. Firm, what I need so I don't get the back pain and so I don't overheat at night. Visit helixsleep.com/BenReacts to get 27% off site-wide. That's helixsleep.com/BenReacts for 27% off site-wide. Make sure you enter our show name after checkout so they know that we sent you. Again, just visit helixsleep.com/BenReacts for this exclusive offer. You're not going to regret it. Why go to one of the big box stores, get a mattress you lay on for 30 seconds, and keep them at home for the next 10 years? Instead, get one made just for you. Did I do the same? Go to helixsleep.com/BenReacts for 27% off the site wide again. Make sure you enter our show name after checkout so they know what you're saying. Well, folks, here we are, special weekend edition of the Ben Shapiro Show, and for an astonishing reason, Sunday night on Saturday night Eastern, the United States military authorized by President Donald J. Trump flew 6 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, the most sophisticated bomber ever assembled, 37 hours from Missouri to Iran's nuclear facilities at Fordo, dropping some 12 massive ordnance penetrators, GBU-57, capable of penetrating some 200 feet of rock each on the nuclear site and obliterating them. According to the Wall Street Journal, quote, Iran had more than 2,000 centrifuges in underground halls at Fordo, roughly half of which were the more advanced IR-6 machines for enriching uranium. It was producing roughly enough near-weapons-grade fissile material to fuel one nuclear weapon a month. So, how bad is the impact? David Albright, an expert on Iran's nuclear program who heads the Institute of Science and International Security, said the impact points of the bombs appear to be very near the location of ventilation shafts into the underground hull. Destroying the ventilation shafts could be a way to do major damage underground. Each of the dozen GBU-57 bunker busters that hit Fordo carried 4 tons of TNT, according to Mick Mulroy, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. Again, according to the Wall Street Journal, satellite images collected by NASA Technologies after the weekend attack show several large holes punched in the rig over the underground installation. Maxar also said entrances to it were blocked with dirt and debris after the U.S. dropped 12 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, each weighing 30,000 pounds, for the first time in the history of warfare. The surface was coated with a layer of blue-gray ash. Now, again, worth noting here that we just dropped 30,000-pound bombs, 12 of them down a shaft that from the air was the size of a washer. If you've seen Top Gun Maverick, essentially it's that, except from 30,000 feet of B-2 and not from an F-15 flown by Maverick. Meanwhile, according to Ynet, U.S. Navy submarines launched approximately 30 Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles from about 480 kilometers, 280 miles away, targeting the Natanz and Isfahan sites. They had been previously damaged but not irreversibly destroyed by Israeli attacks, according to Ynet. So President Trump first took to Truth Social to explain he had authorized the destruction of the Iranian nuclear program. He posted, quote, "We have completed our very successful attack on the 3 nuclear sites in Iran, including Fordo, Natanz, and Esfahan. All planes are now outside of Iran airspace. A full payload of bombs was dropped on the primary site, Fordo. All planes are safely on their way home. Congratulations to our great American warriors. There is not another military in the world that has done this. Now is the time for peace. Thank you for your attention to this matter," which is becoming one of my favorite Trump lists. Thank you for your attention to this matter, because it certainly has everybody's attention. He then explained that Fordo was gone, and he added that this was, of course, a historic moment. He posted, "I will be giving the address to the nation at 10 p.m. at the White House regarding our very successful military operation in Iran. This is an historic moment for the United States of America, Israel, and the world. Iran must now agree to end this war. Thank you." Correct. So, then, 10 p.m., President Trump appeared and explained precisely what had transpired in a historic statement. He was flanked by the Vice President, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. Here's what the President had to say in its entirety.
Thank you very much. A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime, Fordo, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state-sponsored terror. Tonight I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. For 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people, and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago that I would not let this happen. It will not continue. I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel. I want to thank the Israeli military for the wonderful job they've done. And most importantly, I want to congratulate the great American patriots who flew those magnificent machines tonight, and all of the United States military on an operation the likes of which the world has not seen in many, many decades. Hopefully, we will no longer need their services in this capacity. I hope that's so. I also want to congratulate the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisin Kane, spectacular general, and all of the brilliant military minds involved in this attack. With all of that being said, this cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill. Most of them can be taken out in a matter of minutes. There's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight, not even close. There has never been a military that could do what took place just a little while ago. Tomorrow, General Kane, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth will have a press conference at 8 a.m. at the Pentagon. And I want to just thank everybody, and in particular, God. I want to just say, we love you, God, and we love our great military. Protect them. God bless the Middle East. God bless Israel, and God bless America. Thank you very much.
That was the president's full statement. Astonishing stuff there. Typical Trump, like Pete's Trump, the best. Meanwhile, General Dan Raisin Kane of the Defense Department did hold a presser with Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, in which he detailed more information on what was called Operation Midnight Hammer. This was Sunday morning.
At midnight Friday into Saturday morning, a large B-2 strike package comprised of bombers launched from the continental United States. As part of a plan to maintain tactical surprise, part of the package proceeded to the west and into the Pacific as a decoy. A deception effort known only to an extremely small number of planners and key leaders here in Washington and in Tampa. The main strike package comprised of 7 B-2 Spirit bombers, each with 2 crew members, proceeded quietly to the east with minimal communication. Throughout the 18-hour flight into the target area, the aircraft completed multiple in-flight refuelings. Once over land, the B-2s linked up with escort and support aircraft in a complex, tightly timed maneuver requiring exact synchronization across multiple platforms in a narrow piece of airspace, all done with minimal communication. At approximately 6:40 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 2:10 a.m. Iran time, the lead B-2 dropped 2 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator weapons on the first of several aim points at Bordeaux. As the president stated last night, the remaining bombers then hit their targets as well, with a total of 14 MOPs dropped against 2 nuclear target areas. All 3 Iranian nuclear infrastructure targets were struck between 6:40 p.m. and 7:05 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, that's about 2:10 in the morning local time in Iran. With the Tomahawk missiles being the last to strike at Esfahan to ensure we retain the element of surprise.
An astonishing operation by the United States military. Also on Sunday morning, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth sounded off as well.
Tehran is certainly calculating the reality that planes flew from the middle of America and Missouri overnight, completely undetected, over 3 of their most highly sensitive sites, and we were able to destroy nuclear capabilities. And our boys in those bombers are on their way home right now. We believe that'll have a clear psychological impact on how they view the future, and we certainly hope they take the path to negotiate peace. But I could not be more proud.
Yeah. let me be 100% clear. President Trump has more spine, more intestinal fortitude, more cojones than any president of my lifetime. By far, it's not close. This, of course, is a historically courageous man, if that was not clear from the moment he stood up during the last campaign, shaking his fist and yelling, "Fight, fight, fight," after being shot in the ear. President Trump is a man who has courage. He said for decades Iran would not have a nuclear weapon, and then he kept his word. And keeping your word is unbelievably rare. Bill Clinton, 1995, quote, "We are determined to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons." George W. Bush, 2006, "Iran must not be allowed to develop nuclear weapons, period." Barack Obama, 2015, "I have stated that Iran will never be allowed to obtain a nuclear weapon." Joe Biden, 2022, "We will not allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon." Donald J. Trump, "Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated." 2025, this is a man of courage who keeps his word with spine, with true, unbelievable, heroic spine. President Trump was already a historic figure, but he is now a seminal figure in both American history and in world history. First, American history. President Trump faced down a lot of haters, both Democratic America haters and the Republican horseshoe theory isolationist friends. President Trump was never going to start World War III. That was not what was going to happen here. Anyone who told you that was going to happen was lying to you. Because President Trump lives in the world. He lives in the world of reality. And he played this absolutely perfectly. It is not possible for a president to have played this better. President Trump was not dragged into a war. He managed this with absolutely stunning professionalism, cleverness, with common sense. He gave the Israelis the ability to do what they needed to do, and then Israel did, with unbelievable courage and innovation. Israel cleared the skies. Israel killed Iran's top generals. Israel devastated their nuclear scientists. And President Trump waited. He offered Iran an off-ramp, and then another off-ramp, and then another off-ramp. Off-ramps and off-ramps. And then, when they didn't take it, he acted brilliantly with our unparalleled American military, the greatest military in the history of planet Earth, bar none, no second competitors. In the face of those who believe, both left and right, that American involvement in the world is somehow the prime evil, the great driver of world suffering, that the world is somehow better off in the hands of the Chinese and the Russians, and Iran going nuclear, he stood up. He stood up to the morons like AOC on the left who proclaim that Trump himself is a Hitlerian threat to the world by standing up to a true Hitlerian threat to the world. And he stood up to the dolts on the right who thought that they could somehow claim the movement Donald Trump built, the Make America Great Again movement, for themselves, painting Howard Zinn America-hating turd with a coating of MAGA language and then trying to pass it off as filet mignon. He stood up to all of them. And he proved that America is great again, which brings us to world history. America must be strong in the world. We are the indispensable power. We always were. We must be. And President Trump always understood that to make America great again, America would actually have to be great, which meant reestablishing a central principle. Do not put the United States of America on our core interests. Do not do it. Joe Biden destroyed that credibility. He did so in Afghanistan. He said don't, and then every single person who could did. More, President Trump has reestablished American deterrence. He has reestablished American strength. He always said peace through strength, and he always meant it. This is because President Trump understands the most important thing. American power matters. American credibility matters. American honor matters. And then there's the future of the world. Everything just changed. The Middle East is now a very different place. Israel, our closest ally in the Middle East, maybe in the world, is a regional power with the support of the United States. The Abraham Accords are in the offing for Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Sunni world. The United States is working closely with the Saudis, with the UAE, with Bahrain, with powers in the northern African sphere to join the Abraham Accords, and with Iran on its heels, rocked, their nuclear program destroyed. That is a possibility that would not have been thinkable just a couple of years ago. China, even more importantly, is now thinking twice about Taiwan. Remember, China has been looking across that Taiwan Strait, thinking maybe we'll take Taiwan, and maybe President Trump will do nothing. Well, maybe they're having a second think now that President Trump has used some MOPs to drop them, some massive ordnance penetrators, to drop them on Iranian nuclear facilities. Russia, which may have been casting its eyes at Northern Europe, at Eastern Europe, has to be thinking a little bit about what future expansionism would mean. because of President Trump. He is truly an all-time historic figure. He proved it again over the course of the last few weeks. There's never been anyone quite like him. There probably won't be again. He thinks differently, he acts differently, and that is a magnificent, magnificent thing. Folks, we'll get to more on this in just a moment. First, of course, in these uncertain days, Israel faces attacks as war with Iran continues. Families across Israel are living in fear. They're wondering if the next siren will sound in their neighborhood. Israel launched Operation Rise Alliance, targeting nuclear and military sites deep inside Iran to prevent an existential threat, while bracing for retaliation that is endangering hundreds, thousands, perhaps millions of innocent lives. In the midst of crisis, hope endures. The International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, IFCJ, is on the ground delivering life-saving aid where it's needed most. IFCJ provides emergency food, shelter, trauma support, and security upgrades, including bomb shelters and fortified hospital units. In the past year alone, IFCJ has helped over 2 million people, supplying basic needs to the elderly, Holocaust survivors, new immigrants, and children traumatized by war. As Israel defends her citizens, IFCJ stands with them, funding bulletproof ambulances, supporting first responders, offering comfort to those in the line of fire. Your support means food for the hungry, safety for the vulnerable, hope for a nation under siege. Now, as the world watches and uncertainty grows, you can make a difference through donations. Together, we can bring light to the darkest moments. Visit benforthefellowship.org to donate today. That's one word, benforthefellowship.org to donate. Alrighty, so let's talk about how this happened. Obviously, there were divisions inside the administration. There were rumors up to the day before the actual strike that there were members of the administration, particularly the vice president, who was not supporting the strike. There was some suggestion that the vice president was pushing, saying the United States shouldn't be involved, suggesting the Israelis were going to drag the country into war. Now, that's been denied by the vice president, by others in the room. We know that there was a big fight inside the administration over the course of the last few weeks over the proper path forward. President Trump did not waver on this thing. Apparently, according to Axios, behind the scenes, President Trump's request was made directly to Benjamin Netanyahu last week, that Netanyahu essentially clear the airspace of Iran, take out particular air defense units in order to clear a path for the B-2. Netanyahu apparently said, how can we help? And Trump told Netanyahu he wanted the IAF, the Israeli Air Force, to eliminate as many Iranian air defense systems as possible in southern Iran to clear a path for incoming U.S. B-2 stealth bombers. The U.S. then provided Israel with a list of air defense systems it wanted eliminated ahead of the strike, according to Israeli officials. Apparently, according to Axios, Israeli officials told Axios we did not press the United States during the war. We were careful not to create the impression we are dragging the U.S. into a war. But luckily for us, God hardened Pharaoh's heart. That would be Iran's supreme leader, Khamenei. He acted like an idiot and refused any proposal from the United States. That is absolutely true, obviously. Apparently, the president gave his final go-ahead for the strike a few hours before the actual strike, but there were indications he'd been moving solidly in this direction over the course of the week. A senior administration official said the goal was to create a situation when everyone wasn't expecting it, which is why presumably on Friday, as I talked about on the show, he said he would make a decision within 2 weeks. As I said, the most likely scenario was this. This was the most likely scenario. Not to say I called it, but of course I did, because President Trump has been very consistent in his approach right here. His order to the military to proceed unleashed an operation that has been the focus of top-secret planning, according to the Wall Street Journal. Within hours, B-2 bombers penetrated Iranian airspace and dropped at least half a dozen bunker bombs on Iran's underground nuclear facility at Fordo, and, say, U.S. attack submarines launched Tomahawk cruise missiles against sites in Isfahan as well as Natanz. Apparently, the special envoy, Steve Witkoff, has now been authorized to talk with the Iranians, mainly so that he can hear their proposals for getting everyone to stop slamming the living hell out of them. And the president has made very clear, if Iran reacts the wrong way, there is more coming. If Iran decides that they want to react by attacking the United States, if they wish to respond by closing the Straits of Hormuz, there are a wide variety of things that are bad that Iran can do. And if they do certain things that are bad, much worse things are going to happen. Again, for all of those who are claiming that this was all about regime change, the United States was going to launch hundreds of thousands of troops into Iran the same way that we did in Iraq. That was always sheer absolute crap. But strategically speaking, the reason that Ayatollah Khamenei is alive, beyond the fact that the United States doesn't feel like rebuilding the place, and wouldn't even if Ayatollah Khamenei were killed, because it would be up to the Iranian people to actually do that. The reason for that is because there are a lot of things the United States can do to escalate this, should Iran decide to escalate this. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke quickly after the president issued the airstrike, and here's what he had to say.
Congratulations, President Trump. Your bold decision to target Iran's nuclear facilities with the awesome and righteous might of the United States will change history. In Operation Rising Lion, Israel has done truly amazing things. But in tonight's action against Iran's nuclear facilities, America has been truly unsurpassed. It has done what no other country on earth could do. History will record. President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons. His leadership today has created a pivot of history that can help lead the Middle East and beyond to a future of prosperity and peace. President Trump and I often say, peace through strength. First comes strength, then comes peace. And tonight, President Trump and the United States acted with a lot of strength. President Trump, I thank you. The people of Israel thank you. The forces of civilization thank you. God bless America. God bless Israel. And may God bless our unshakable alliance, our unbreakable faith.
Now, meanwhile, the Iranians are doing what they always do. They're threatening fire and fury. Now, to be clear, the reason that I'm making fun of that a little bit is because literally every night of this war so far, they've issued some public statement about how this will be a historic night that will be remembered for the rest of time. And then they shoot off like 10 missiles at Israel. So this idea that they are going to take on the #1